Welcome to the Miami-Dade College Journalism Speaker Series. I'm your host, Manolo Barco. Joining us today is Eliott Rodriguez from CBS 4. Eliott, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So, Eliott, you're a decorated journalist here in South Florida. You've won Emmy Awards, Monroe Awards. Talk to us about your infancy in your career when you first started at the Catalyst, right? Miami-Dade College?
It's been a while, but yeah, let's go back a few decades. I attended high school here in Miami. I graduated from LaSalle High School in Coconut Grove, and I was the first person in my family to go to college. So at that time, I didn't have somebody who took me to visit different campuses like I did with my daughters. I just went to the place where my friends went, and Miami-Dade seemed to be the most convenient place. So I went to Miami-Dade College, the South Campus, from 1974 until 1976. And in high school, I had worked on the high school newspaper as a cartoonist because I wanted to be an artist. My dream was to be a graphic artist. So at Miami-Dade College, the newspaper, The Catalyst, was an excellent, at that time, community college newspaper. And the advisor was a fellow by the name of Mario Garcia, Dr. Mario Garcia. And he took me in. I became involved in at The Catalyst, but as an illustrator, as a cartoonist. And they actually paid me. It wasn't much money, but I got a little bit of money to draw cartoons for each edition. But one day, Mario insisted. He said, listen, if you're going to be on the staff and we're going to put your name on there as the cartoonist, you have to take journalism classes with me.
He tricked you.
I guess he tricked me. I think he wanted to fill his classrooms. So I said, all right, fine. So I took journalism classes. At the same time, I was drawing cartoons for the paper, editorial cartoons and illustrations. And one day, after an assignment that he particularly liked, he came to me and said, you know what? You're a pretty good writer, a pretty good reporter. What are you doing wasting your time just drawing cartoons? Why don't you get more involved in reporting? And I did. I got more involved in the newspaper. I became the news editor and a reporter. And I remember doing a story back then that won a statewide award. The buildings were shaking, and it was because at that time, Miami was experiencing a building boom, especially out in Kendall in Southwest Miami-Dade, and it was that developers were blasting nearby and the buildings were shaking. So I did a story that was a headline, big headline in the Catalyst at the time. It's a pretty good story, and Mario was like, gave me a big thumbs up and said, yeah, you know, you really should concentrate on reporting. And that's where I got the bug. That's where I just enjoyed being a reporter, getting the story, and then relaying that story to the readers.
So, and eventually you started your journalism career in print, right? You started with the Herald and Miami New Times?
Yeah, so I spent 2 years at Miami-Dade College I left as the news editor, and then from there I went to the University of Miami. And my desire was to be a reporter. You know, I had seen All the President's Men. I wanted to be an investigative reporter for the New York Times or the Washington Post. And so at the University of Miami, I was a reporter at the Miami Hurricane. But I also did something that now I look back on it, and it was great. I did internships while I was at the University of Miami. When I was at Miami-Dade, I was all set to go to the University of Florida because that's where my friends were, and they have a great journalism program. But now when I look back on it, I think I made the right decision going to the University of Miami because of the internships that I did. I did internships at the Miami Herald, and it was right when they started what they called their neighbors section. It was a small community section, and I was working there. And also I worked at the Herald writing obituaries, and I followed a reporter, Edna Buchanan. I'm sure you might know she's just one of the best crime reporters in the country. She kind of took me under her wing, and so I had double bylines with Edna Buchanan. I was just a kid in college. So as soon as I graduated from the University of Miami, the Miami Herald led me to believe that I would get a job right away. And back then, this is in 1978, most of the reporters, and you got to remember, in 1978, the Miami Herald was about this thick. It was a big, everybody read the Miami Herald back then. And I was working as an intern. I was doing a good job. I was getting great stories, front page stories in the Miami Herald as an intern. And they said, don't worry, Eliott, when you graduate, we're going to get you a job here. Well, I graduated from the University of Miami, walked the graduation, And they said, you know what, we have a job, we just don't have it yet. So what did I do? I got on the elevator at the Herald building downtown, and I went up to the 6th floor at the Miami News. And I applied for a job there, and they had an opening, and they hired me right away. So I was, from the time I graduated from the University of Miami to the time I started working full-time as a reporter, I think 2 weeks went by, and I started as a reporter at the Miami News, which was also an excellent afternoon newspaper back then. Back then we had two papers, the Herald, which was the newspaper of record, the morning paper, and then we had the Miami News, the afternoon paper, also a very good paper. My first job was crime reporter, police beat reporter, but on the overnight shift. So I would go into work, I think at 11 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock at night, and work that overnight shift. And what was great about it was that the Herald deadline was like 2 in the morning, but the Miami News was still alive, so I could still get overnight stories that broke. So I would routinely have like the big headline in the Miami News. So I worked at the Miami News for 2.5 years, and my stories caught the eye of the news director at WPLG, Channel 4 at the time. The anchor was a fellow by the name of Ralph Rennick, who was here for many years here in Miami, and his assistant called me and said, hey, you're the guy at the Miami News, and I was covering police reporting and also courts. And at the time, Florida had just gotten cameras in the courtroom, and they were looking for a reporter who could go to the courtrooms and do court stories, because they were going to devote more time to it. So again, it was just a matter of luck, being at the right place at the right time. But that was my first television job, was in May of 1980 at WPLG, after having worked for about 3 or 4 years as a newspaper reporter.
And then you also worked at WPLG in Philadelphia as well, right?
Yes, I spent 3 years at WPLG, and I got a job offer in Philadelphia at the ABC affiliate there. I had never been to Philadelphia in my life. I went up for the interview. They offered me the job. So I moved off to Philadelphia and spent 5.5 years there and absolutely loved it. I was a reporter for the first 3 years, and then I was the morning anchor for the last 2 years.
Perfect. We'll take a momentary break and we'll return with Eliott Rodriguez of CBS 4.
Miami-Dade College has career paths in anything you want to be. What's your story? Be global. Be cutting edge. Be inventive. Be investigative. Be a hero. What do you want to be? Be the best. Be you. Be MDC.
Welcome back to the Miami-Dade College Journalism Speaker Series. We're here with Eliott Rodriguez. Eliott, you were talking to us about your experience in Philadelphia.
That's right. I spent 5 years in Philadelphia. The last 2 years I was the morning anchor. So I'll never forget the numbers 3, 4, 5, because that's the time I would get up in the morning at 3:45, so I can get in to do the newscast at 6:15 in the morning. Now they do them even earlier. Now it's even earlier. So I did that, and in the cold, before the streets were shoveled, I would be out there. So I did it. I worked in Philadelphia a total of 5 years. I liked it, but Miami's home. And so when the opportunity came to come back to Miami, I went to Channel 10, WPLG, and I worked there for 11 years, from approximately 1988 until 1999. In 99 is when I started working here at CBS 4.
Talk to us a little bit about the differences between working in print and working on TV.
Like night and day. Well, like night and day as far as how you present the story, but the basics of being a reporter doesn't change. I mean, a good reporter gets the facts, a good reporter asks the right questions, a good reporter knows how to tell a story. The difference is when I was a newspaper reporter, I could get a great story on the phone, just talk to somebody and write down quotes. A television reporter, you have to be there, have the visuals, and know how to match the words with the visuals. So That took me a little bit of time. My first time on television was in 1980, May of 1980, when I was hired at WPLG. And when they hired me with no television experience, they said, "Don't worry, we'll train you." Well, guess what? They didn't. They just put me out there. And my first report was a live shot in a big case. It was a superintendent of schools who had been accused of stealing money, and it went to trial. The verdict, it was a big verdict, and everybody was breaking into programming. And this was literally my first television report. Remember, I was a newspaper guy, print guy, and it was catastrophic. It was terrible. I was on camera saying, "The plane, wait for the plane, wait for the plane." It was awful. I literally thought that the next day they were going to fire me. I thought, this is it. This TV thing wasn't for me. I'm going to go back to my cushy, my newspaper job, which I enjoyed. But no, they stuck with me and they said, "You know what? We said we were going to train you, and it was our fault we didn't do it." And so they did. They spent more time, gave me more time in order to learn the craft of being a television reporter.
And then what would you tell to a young journalist who is interested in going into the field, whether it's TV, whether it's print, whether it's radio? What advice would you give to them?
Well, the advice that I would give to a young person today hoping to break into the business is that you have to be multimedia talented. I mean, in order to be on television, you have to know, it's not like when I started, it was completely different. You have to know how to shoot, how to write, how to be the reporter, how to edit the story. That wasn't the case when I started. To this day, I don't know how to edit. I don't edit stories. I don't shoot stories, but they have to be multimedia trained, as you well know. The jobs are also not as many as there were before. There's a lot of competition for the jobs, and you have to be aggressive. You have to sell yourself. But if you have a passion for doing it, I would say follow your dream and do it. One of the tips that I give for any young person who wants to, because I hear a lot of people say, "Well, I want to be on TV. I want to be a reporter on television," and they get an internship. An internship is fantastic. If you get an internship, and the internships are not as easy to get as they were before, but if you're lucky enough to get one, and you're working at a TV station to say, I want to be on the air, well, guess what? They're not going to put you on the air Monday through Friday on their main shows. You may, what I tell young people is, listen, show up there on a Saturday or a Sunday or a holiday where there's a poor schmuck on the assignment desk working who has to work on that Saturday or Sunday. Go to Dunkin' Donuts, get a box of donuts, and bring that assignment editor. Say, "Here, I'm coming by to help. Here's some donuts. What do we have going on today? Do you need somebody to go out and get a soundbite for an interview? Do you need somebody?" And chances are they're going to say, "Yes, absolutely. It's Saturday. We have a slim crew. We only have one photographer. I need to go out because the mayor is having a ribbon cutting, and we don't have anybody to ask a question. Can you go with the photographer?" And that's how you get yourself in the door. That's how. And then when you go out with that photographer, not only do you ask the question, you tell the photographer, "Hey, can I shoot a stand-up with you? Can you help me?" And you'll find that there are people that are willing to help. So that's a little tip for young people who get to the point of having an internship and want to get that first on-air job.
Let's talk about mentors. Who are some of your mentors, and how important is it to find someone that will help you?
Well, it is vitally important. Probably my most important mentor was at Miami-Dade College. It was Dr. Mario Garcia. Mm-hmm. And all these years later, we still stay in touch. He's at Columbia University now. We're still friends when I go to New York. I have a daughter living in New York, so I'm in New York every few months. I always make it a point to see Mario. He's the guy that told me, "Hey, quit. You're not that good of a cartoonist. Maybe you're a pretty good writer." And he shifted my focus from being an artist, a graphic artist, to getting into reporting.
Give me examples or specifics of some things he gave you advice on.
Well, I remember in his class, one of the assignments was you had to write your own obituary. And he seemed to like it. He seemed to like the writing. And again, the more I got involved in the student newspaper, and of course another thing I tell young people is take advantage of what the college or university has to offer. The newspaper, now it's on the online edition of the newspaper, the website or wherever they have, the radio station, the TV station. Take advantage of that in order to get experience. Another mentor was when I worked at the Miami Herald. It was Edna Buchanan, who was the crime reporter, and she took me under her wing and taught me how a few things about getting police stories and talking to people. Don't always just take the police version of it. Go actually talk to people. Many times you find that people in these horrible situations want somebody to talk to. Other times you're going to be told, get the heck out of here, out of my face. You're going to have a very thick skin in order to deal with that, but that's just part of the job.
So how much of a learning curve is there for that? Going to such a funeral or something that you're going to go talk to somebody at the worst possible time. Maybe someone's been arrested, someone's been killed.
That's right.
How do you?
If you're too shy to do something like that, I would say do something else, because that's just part of our job. And again, you find out that there are many people who, at that point, do have something to say, do have something important to say, and will talk to you. Again, many times people are going to just slam the door in your face, and you're just going to have to deal with that. And you're going to have to deal with it, obviously, in a respectful manner, knowing what they're going through, and take a step back and not, you got to know when enough is enough.
Perfect. We're going to take another momentary break, and we'll return with Eliott Rodriguez of CBS 4.
Miami-Dade College has career paths in anything you want to be. What's your story? Be global. Be cutting edge. Be inventive. Be investigative. Be a hero. What do you want to be? Be the best. Be you. Be MDC.
Welcome back to the Miami-Dade College Journalism Speaker Series. We're here with Eliott Rodriguez of CBS 4. Eliott, talk to us about your experience in Cuba. I understand that you interviewed Fidel Castro.
Yes, I did interview Fidel Castro, and traveling to Cuba as a reporter is probably one of the most emotional stories that I've done. Both of my parents, they passed, but they were Cuban immigrants, by the way, who came to this country. I was born in New York, but grew up in a very Cuban household. So the first opportunity I got to go to Cuba was when I worked at Channel 10. It was in the early 1990s when not too many reporters were going in there. So I went in there. We actually posed as tourists back then with a photographer from Channel 10, female photographer. She and I posed as a couple and went into Santiago de Cuba and did some stories there. But later on, I traveled quite a lot to Cuba. I was there for the first Pope's visit. I was there for the current Pope's visit. I was there for a Summit of the Americas. I was there when Obama went, and the changes that the Obama administration brought towards Cuba. So I have traveled, and then of course I was there for the funeral of Castro. So I've traveled to Cuba extensively. I've been from one end of the island to the other. The interview that I did with Fidel Castro was in, I think it was probably 2002, could have been 2003, when I actually went to Cuba, believe it or not, with the former governor of Minnesota, Jesse Ventura, who was open to the idea of allowing American farmers to sell their products there. So he took a group of American farmers and agricultural people and business people to Cuba, and I went along with him because I'd gone to Minnesota and interviewed Jesse Ventura, and so I went with him, and at this food expo that Jesse Ventura and the people organized, Castro showed up, and he was always hard to get. I mean, it's very difficult to get an interview with him, but that was the moment that I was able to stop and get him in a corner and ask him questions. At the time, the story that was being followed in Cuba was something called the Varela Project. It was an effort to have elections in Cuba. It was petitions that were signed, and so I asked him about that. I asked him a few questions about that. I asked him about relations with the United States. If you get a couple questions from Fidel Castro, you're lucky, and if you get him to answer the question, you're even luckier. So that was my experience one-on-one with Fidel Castro. Then, of course, I returned when he died, and they took his body from one end of the island, from Havana, to Santiago, so I covered that. So I was there for at least a week covering that story.
You go from covering big events like that to some of the more local ones.
Right.
Not necessarily that they are not as big either, but talk to us, what is your daily activities like? What's your schedule like? What's a normal average day? I know and not everything is different every day, but.
I'll tell you this, Manolo, if somebody had told me back when I started in TV that at this stage of the game, so many years later, I would be working as much as I am, I would say, you're crazy. I mean, you know, I'm not a spring chicken. I'm getting, you know, close to, you know, it could be retirement age somewhere down the line. But we're doing more. We're doing more. We're doing more newscasts. We're doing more for web. We're doing more we even do a little update that you can listen to on your Alexa. So we're putting more product out there. And also because of the economic realities and the realities of, you know, viewership that's not growing as fast as you would want on television. It is growing, you know, streaming, and that's another area. But we don't have the people working in the newsroom that we once had. So those of us who are here have to do more out of necessity.
What would you consider your most memorable, not necessarily your biggest story, but one that was a little unique, a little bit different? A little quirky even, maybe?
A little quirky?
Yeah.
I don't know about quirky, but really the story that was the most impactful to me was going to Cuba and reconnecting with my family that I had not known. It was because of my job as a journalist I was able to go to the town where my dad was from and meet my aunts and uncles. I always thought that I was from a small family, and I was wrong. My dad was the first in his family to leave, and he was one of 6 brothers and sisters. But in New York, it was my mom, my dad, my sister, and myself. I thought we were a small family. I get to Cuba, it's like, wow, I'm actually part of a big family. So thanks to the fact that I worked as a journalist, I got to experience that. I'll always be grateful for it, and it was one of the most important moments of my life.
And how is it? I'm sure that you can't go into a grocery store, Publix or Winn-Dixie or wherever, and not be recognized. People come up to you.
Oh, no, I'm not recognized all the time. What happens is, you're never recognized when you want to be recognized. When you don't want to be recognized, you are. For example, if I walk into CVS and I have to buy pain medication or something like that, people will, hey, aren't you the guy from the news? But if I go into a nice restaurant, you want to get a nice table with a view, nobody knows who you are. But it's very nice when people recognize you. You know, those are our viewers, and so I always make it a point to be accessible, you know, to be friendly. If they want to take a picture, that's fine.
And now social media being such a big thing, how do you navigate yourself through that world now?
I'm learning social media as we go. Let's put it that way. We have a few of the younger reporters and anchors here are much more savvy when it comes to social media, but I'm still learning, and I'm open to learning. And one of the things I learned recently we have our weekend anchor, Frances Yang, who has like tens of thousands of followers, and she was telling me, Eliott, and I said, Frances, look at my social media. What do you think? And she looked, I said, oh, your social media is great, but you're making a big mistake. You're not interacting with, when people comment on what you post, you're not interacting with them. I said, well, but I just posted that. Can I just leave it at that? No, you must interact. So I learned that. Now I make it a point to interact more on social media. Now I make it a point to do more on social media. And it is gratifying. And you see that you're bringing in more people, and more people are seeing your product. So it's a good thing for everybody.
So I'm sure the business has changed a lot since you started, 3 decades ago.
Yeah.
Where do you see it going in the future?
Well, one way I see it going is streaming. And I know that CBS is big on it. They have CBSN, and now the local stations are also doing that. So you may be seeing us on a device near you. I mean, we are online already, but I think that what they want to do is where you have it as an app where you can go and you get your local news and your national and international news all in one place.
Perfect. Well, Eliott, thank you for joining us today, and we'll be back soon with our next episode of the MDC Journalism Speaker Series.